I'd grown up really uprooted, so I moved every 2 years in my life and was just attracted to these go-getters and people who are ahead of the curve and like trying things in different countries. So my name is Amena Schlaikjer, and I have a little initiative called The Wellness Works. My mission is to basically come up with creative ideas with other partners in order to empower people to take control of their well-being. So it's been now the era of connecting dots. I think you're only as good as the dots you can connect, otherwise your life is just complete chaos. I think it's always been there. So I think since like college burnout and like trying to learn the tools early on how to manage my own personal well-being, I realized that people are really lacking these tools. But I had to go through 20 years of a career in sort of lifestyle industry. A lot of it was cosmetics and fashion, and that was very much the thing, the what. Like I was attracted to this, I don't know, the packaging, the marketing industry, how to get really funky, cool products out there. And then I realized it was extremely one-dimensional. And as I got deeper and in search of a process, which I think a lot of us look for later on in our career, I came across innovation, because I was like, well, what makes people tick? Why do people want to buy things that look really cool and pretty? And why would they want to buy something that's harmful to them or their health? And then figuring out what innovation and that whole world was about, and coming up with this really cool process and how to operate. And then I think it was the fusion of those two 10 years ago, where I wanted to just innovate things that were healthy for people. I surrounded myself with entrepreneurs, and like you, was very, very inspired by them. Like since the age of 16, I got out there and I worked. All through college, I worked 30 or 40 hours. Like I went to night school at one point so I could work all day in a full-time job. And I always picked entrepreneurs because I just found them to be fascinating. One, risk takers. Two, really adaptable people. Three, and I'd grown up really uprooted, so I moved every 2 years in my life and was just attracted to these go-getters and people who are ahead of the curve and like trying things in different countries. And so I just kind of followed them around like a puppy dog. I think I told you before, I had 35 jobs. And I think that's why I kind of honed or mastered a skill around being the second nut, because I'm really good at reading leadership. I can tell who's a good leader and who's not, and why. And it's not a good or bad black and white thing, it's very complex. And I know how to see the gaps and fill them with the right support or the right idea. Right. So I was around these entrepreneurs and I was like, well, I gotta be like them. I gotta be like them, when I wasn't recognizing that there was a place for what I was doing unconsciously. So I want to qualify something, and maybe this is a bounce, because I don't consider myself as a pure entrepreneur. I think there are grades of entrepreneurship. I think I'm very entrepreneurial, but I don't own a company and a team and I'm throwing a product or service necessarily out into the world. I think I am a great example of an innovative second nut, or like the money penny you would absolutely love to have. Because how I work with clients as an independent and someone who gathers ad hoc people on a project is I figure out what their problem is, and then I become their best supporter of that problem. And I want to solve it with them, because I go, check it out, I've got this awesome toolkit of how to be adaptive and how to come up with ideas that you didn't think you had, and how to sense in areas that you forgot how to sense in, so that we can envision something really new for your company. And I've gotten really realistic about that's my sweet spot, at least for now. And I think that's an entrepreneurial, yeah. And I got comfortable with this when I went to a school of creative leadership. I attended Think in Amsterdam, and they have schools around the world. But it felt like it was a school of leadership, I thought, but they kind of seemed to present themselves as a school of entrepreneurship, and they were pushing everybody to come up with their amazing world-saving idea that they needed to pitch and fund and scale and get out there into the world. And it dawned on me, like, actually, most entrepreneurs are really delusional. I think when you can get really honest with yourself and understand what your scale and your scope is, that's when you can start seeing real shifts happen with yourself and not set yourself up for failure or create a stretch that's unrealistic, only because it seems fashionable. And you know very well as I do that we're in a phase of entrepreneurship being fashionable. everybody and their grandmother is trying to be an entrepreneur. And I think that's great. I think it's a skill set that everyone should have, but that doesn't mean they have to be an entrepreneur. They can be in a corporation and be an entrepreneur. They could be an innovator, startup catalyst of that kind, or they could be someone who works for an entrepreneur and understands the culture of how to get things off the ground and add value. I think it was a maturation of self in that I was just accepting that this is a really good place to be and hone skill. I think I started to see the difference between dabblers and masters, and I think I was not appreciating this skill that was building up. And yes, it's a mindset. I don't want to cut myself off from being an entrepreneur in the future. That may very well happen, and I welcome it and embrace it. But I think I settled into, like, this is a horizon now that I need to pay attention to and be present to and be proud of and do really, really good work here. Instead of, like, I just show up and do my consulting projects and damn, I have all these amazing ideas in my computer. You know, there was a naivety about that. And I know now that the way I came up with those ideas is what I had to offer. Okay, so there's a big difference in working with somebody who's dabbling because, I don't know, they're inexperienced, or they just came into a ton of money and they're going to try something, or they're new to an industry and they just think it's trendy and it's going to be a hot opportunity. And a master who's established a process or a way of operating and is connected to some level of deeper meaning in their life, and they want to put something out there in the world. That has got so much more rooted grounding to it. There's so much clarity. They have a set of filters or a set of pillars and values that a dabbler couldn't express because they're just following whatever's hot. You know, they're kind of, you know, if you're Simon Sinek outer circle people, as opposed to really digging deep into a meaning and why they get up every day. So I think there's a difference between, like, people who do a lot of stuff, like you and I think we're innovators. I think we help other people also come up with ideas and be entrepreneurs. We're entrepreneurial. You're much more of an entrepreneur than I am. But we get masterful at our process. You get so good at it, you can get in front of your class and teach it in a heartbeat, right? Because it's just the way you attack the world. And I think dabblers don't have that. They just kind of drop whatever and move on to the next thing, and that distraction is the biggest inhibitor to success. Yeah, okay, so I think there's two parts to this. I think there's a necessity in dabbling in order to achieve levels of mastery, because people who don't experiment enough to hone in on, ooh, I like this piece, like this is the piece I want to start focusing on, and does it give me energy or does it zap my energy? If they're honest about that, then they have kind of the cornerstone to which they can start building their mastery, right? But you have to dabble in order to get there. And then I think once you get to this level of mastery, which I think you've arrived at, it's around the process. You're a master at, like, how do I get the startup pieces, the chess pieces in play so that I can step back from the board and approach another board with the exact same process, you know? So again, I think maybe master dabbler is a great way to describe that, because you have honed that skill. Yeah, and this is where I think where the lessons of deep practice come into play, where you can start calibrating and you're not, like, sort of pendulum swinging between different modes of operating, ideas, jobs, partners, whatever it might be, right? So I learned this in the practice of iterating through the innovation process, which entrepreneurs do naturally, because at some point you have to create enough constraints. And I spend 80% of my projects setting up constraints in order to be creative. Like, people think this blue sky creativity, blue ocean stuff, I don't really believe in it, because your idea is only as good as the constraints that you set up. And the more you do that, the more you go, okay, exactly what is the challenge question? What am I articulating? What are the values we're working by? What are the filters that I'm operating in? How am I scoping this? You know, what are the highs and the lows of this project? Like, there's so many tools I use to get, like, razor sharp. I'm polishing down the challenge. Then, boom, something opens up to how you can create. And then you have to decide, how many times do I want to iterate this, or how many ideas is enough? Because I could go forever. Especially if you're with creative beings, you can just go non-stop. And you just get better at making the call. And I think this comes into every field of, any master of any domain will do this. You know, in athletics, in in entertainment, in politics, in business. I think you get to a point where you know when to say stop. If you look back on human history, we've had support systems that no longer exist in uprooted, urban, transient expat cities in particular, if that's really the bulk of your audience. But in any sort of metropolitan city where we don't have elders anymore. We don't have channels of wisdom and knowledge that come to us in a very practical sense. We're in highly competitive environments, so we don't have like sober, neutral advice from others, right? There's always a lens that people are talking to you with. We don't have religious people, gurus, priests, like this ilk of support that again give us kind of like the pillars of thinking even, or kind of hone our value systems. We don't really have ethics anymore sometimes, because you have to go into a new market and kind of be a cowboy or a pioneer, and you break the rules a lot, right? So without this sort of, it's like an ethical support system. And we've talked about how sustainability actually, frankly, is just like a new set of ethics, right? It's not this new market or new horizon. It's just the way we should be operating. When you don't have those things instilled as a value set, I think people can feel really lost. And I think all of us as entrepreneurs feel extremely lost at times. So I also think that's the reason why this whole coaching industry has taken off, even though it's got a lot of holes in it. But I think we're really lacking coaching, mentors, advisors, neutral opinions, hard, constructive feedback as to why you're not doing things right. Particularly for you awesome millennials that are going to save the world but feel entitled sometimes. And I have the right to say that because I am mature and in my pushing 40s. Okay, so I am a long sufferer of burnout, depression in my early 20s, and I think I had 3 bad burnouts in life where, like, you know, one point I didn't sleep for 10 days straight, and I mean, people die from stuff like that. It was intense, and just incredible lows. And I think this work that I'm doing is just trying to figure out what are the tools we can hone to pull ourselves out of that, or you know, catch ourselves before we fall into it. And that whole process is just kind of a self-discovery process. So it's just really learning who you are and what makes you tick. And I just don't think a lot of people have the patience, the time carved out, the focus to go there. And so I really believe entrepreneurs need to have a dedicated practice of some kind where it's somehow meditative or mindful, even though they don't have to do formal meditation. But it's a checking back in so that you're able to calibrate before you totally burn out or pass out, right? And if you have that self-awareness, and it's all about a practice of self-awareness to just check back in on a daily basis, because that's how frequent it needs to be for you to get good at this, then you won't fall to such lows. And so much of it is energetic. It's in the body. We get so used to relying on this, I call it our cerebral body, because we let the rest of our body just be transportation systems for this is who I am. And we don't tap into a deeper intelligence. And I think every person, let alone entrepreneur, needs that as a practice. You also need support, so you need camaraderie, so you feel like you're not alone in that situation. I think isolation is probably the worst aspect of anybody who deals with depression or deals with hard times. So making sure that you have great friendships and cultivating friendships that aren't just acquaintances that show up to your parties or your events, but people who you can call on and they can hear it in your voice that something's going on, right? I think it's those two. Have a practice and have a support system. And as you have those two modes of feedback, your internal and your external, you start developing what the meaning is that you want to make in this world. Oh man, it's just the simple things in life. It's so simple. I'm sure it's like waking up and seeing your kid, or I know very well now the things that make me happy, whether it's as simple like my favorite dessert or my favorite thing to do on a Sunday or a book that I want to reread. And just this practice of constantly getting present, I think if I can go back to that, that makes me optimistic, because it means I'm starting from a white canvas. You know, a lot of people think this idea of mindfulness practices or meditation is about, I don't know, like getting calm, or it's kind of being existential in some way, but actually it's honing your ability to focus and be self-aware so that you can start from zero again and look at the world like a kid. I'm sure you've witnessed in your son, he gets into meditative states all the time. If I were somebody who was, you know, if I could talk to my 20-year-old self, I'd say, honey, what's the practice you want to try? Right? That really connects your mind and body and allows you to kind of calibrate your self-awareness. What's the meaning you're searching for, and who are you going to talk to develop that meaning? And then who's out there that actually has a great process? Like the way they approach stuff just seems super ninja-like. And anytime they attack anything, they use the same process because there's a lot of wisdom behind that. I don't believe in hacking. I don't think hacking works. I don't think it does. I think it works in sort of mini steps when you're solving tangible problems in a business, because you can kind of jump ahead. But I also think that it doesn't work in the long game, and it absolutely doesn't work when it comes to self-awareness practices or getting to know yourself, because again, that just takes experience and maturity and time. But I think if there were a way to sort of hack it in a sense, it is just understanding that failure is part of the process. And all entrepreneurs say this, they theorize it, but you almost need to practice it. So I have this self-practice of 80-20. Like I only control 20% of my life, right? And I look at, like, if you were to look at it in terms of time management and draw yourself a wheel, and you know you're going to try and carve out 6 to 8 hours for sleep, how would you carve up, and that's maybe a good, you know, 30-40% of your day. How would you carve up another 30% of your day on stuff you are just like hardline focused on? Like you're always going to show up to that on a daily basis, whether it's creation or connection or something very specific in work. And then the rest of it you just let fall away. You don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know what crisis is going to come into your board. You don't know what economic downturn is going to throw you off your game. You just need to have kind of control on that 20% and be okay with failure as an option. And practice it. Like actually go, I'm going to do this project for the purpose of failing and see if something else comes out of it. And if I have that level, like if I can detach enough from my ego to go, there's something else in this that's not this thing that I'm going to learn from, that is a great exercise to take on. I do these little mini projects for myself. They're not startup companies, but they're mini initiatives. And in it I was like, oh, there was the insight behind Airbnb, which someone else created, but I had it before them. It just, you learn little bits and you get feedback. And I think if you get good at throwing things out there and reading the feedback, then you start to get elegant as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a parent, whatever it might be. I think the big things that pop up for me and keep me here is, one is the dynamism. So things just keep on reinventing themselves and I'm constantly surprised. There's never a point I get to where I'm like, I'm an expert in this area, I know better than someone else. So it challenges me in its dynamism. Another one is you're constantly surrounded by smart people, so it's a place that attracts interesting talent, even if they're coming in and going back out, and you have access to these people to have great conversations. Another one is it's pretty easy to set up a business in a sense, and to experiment that business. So you can get your hands on pretty inexpensive resources to trial stuff quickly. Now it might take a lot longer to get to success here, but the experimentation phase is really easy. And I love, like there are a lot of things about China that drive me crazy, but I love the optimism and sort of the beautiful naivete sometimes of Chinese people. And they're just always ready for something new, something positive, something interesting. And I think in a lot of sophisticated markets you deal with cynicism, you deal with bogged down thinking or a lot of competitive attitudes and sarcasm. Whereas here it's just like, yeah, cool, let's do it. and you're like, right on, let's go for this. And it's not easy. It's definitely not an easy place, and it's getting harder as it gets saturated with everyone and their grandmother and every wealthy parent telling their child to go be an entrepreneur. But I think for those who are dedicated to it, it gives them the playing ground to sort of witness and be aware of who's really good at the game and who's worth listening to and then being really careful with your time and not wasting it with random people and random shit. Shit, full circle.